Well, thank you, Nate. I so appreciate you joining me for this top 20 restorative leader top watch list. I really want the world to understand who you are and perspective of this restorative leader and what you do in the world. So, Nate Shalev, if you would please share with me.
Yeah, who I am and what I do in the world. It's such a it should be so succinct. So yeah, my name is Nick Shalev. My pronouns are they, them. I have my own inclusion consulting business, so I help to create workplaces where businesses and people thrive. I primarily do that through speaking and advising now. But what brings me to this work? I love the phrasing of restorative leadership. I do a lot of community organizing work, and I think one of the things that our companies are missing is this restorative piece, is this idea of like we actually are in community with one another, and there's a responsibility to repair harm when it happens, and also that we are like responsible for maintaining this community and making sure that we all can like show up in the ways that we are able to. So I bring that lens to it and those kinds of conversations. But I really appreciate the framework of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, first question is about exploring visibility beyond the surface. I know when we first met each other, I spoke to the fact that I follow your thought leadership and share that with others. And so I think that you already have put yourself very visibly out speaking, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about this importance of moving beyond just regular visibility and getting to this non-binary idea of individuals in the workplace.
Yeah, I think thought leadership is always such a funny phrase, but I one of the things that's been most valuable when I've been posting on LinkedIn about my experiences, I lean on my personal stories to help build empathy, create buy-in, and kind of, as you said, like allow folks just to understand both the experiences that I'm having, and then also understand what actual impact the work that they can have like will do. So from even the sense of respecting somebody's pronouns, like what does that actually feel like when somebody doesn't respect your pronouns? How does it affect somebody's ability to show up at work? That you're constantly on edge, you're constantly having to correct somebody. It just feels bad all the time. And folks who don't have that experience just don't know. And so that's one of the ways that I've been able to utilize it. And it's been some of the expected experiences is folks who share my experiences and say like, yes, that resonates with me. Thank you for sharing this. Like I want my manager to understand this, and my coworkers and my colleagues, and I also want to put this out into the world. Some of the unexpected things are like the parents of queer kids, or like parents of, or not parents, but like people with trans partners, or there's so many different layers that we don't necessarily know that folks have these experiences. And so it's one of those things that when we focus on inclusion, we're focusing on the people who need it most, right? Historically marginalized folks who need support, but it benefits everyone. And I think that's been one of the things that I have been very surprised about when sharing these kind of aspects of identity and encouraging action in folks, has been these folks been like, this touches my life in this way. And so we don't ever actually know what's happening with folks. So it's been one of the more pleasant surprises of being visible.
I also think what you said is profound, also thinking in that proactive perspective as a person that might be going through a hiring experience, is to recognize those signs of what you're probably going to be treated like later, right? Because during an interview process, the company and yourself are often on your best performance, right?
Right.
You're trying
Right.
to at least show up as your best self. And if that's the best self they have for you, which is to not be careful, to not be thoughtful in their interactions with you, to not care about who you are and how you want to show up. Yeah, it tells you a lot of how you're probably gonna be treated later.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like even going into an office space, is there like a gender inclusive restroom? Is there are all the lights fluorescent? Is the security guard how is like the security treating me when I'm entering? Do I have to submit a legal ID? What does that mean? And so there are all these different pieces that I think are just opportunities for folks to feel included or experience that friction.
Okay, so to question number three, after that addendum, talking a little bit more about the personal journey and professional growth. You could share, when you think in your own experience of your career, again, I welcome experiences working with others. What are some pivotal moments where identity as a trans and autistic individual influenced your professional journey? Are there any changes you wish had been in place to support you better during those times? Is there anything now that you've experienced you hope would be repeated?
I mean, the short answer is yes. Yes to all the things. But I'm thinking there's looking back on my career journey, I've left every position I've been in, uh, I would say largely due to not being supported as an autistic person. And part of that is I didn't know what I needed. Part of that is even I am late diagnosed, and so even if I did know, I don't know if I would have been able to navigate the stigma. Now I know how to ask for an accommodation, but at that point, it's not really well known. And to say something like, um, I can't function with. There was an office renovation one time, and we came back to the office, and it was white walls and an open office format, and so I just couldn't function. And I thought everyone thought it was a terrible redesign, but everyone thought it was maybe not like the most aesthetically pleasing, but they could still function, and I could not function in that office environment anymore because I was overstimulated, because I was having shutdowns all the time. I just couldn't show up to work, and I ended up leaving that position. But things like having clear communications or getting feedback that I wasn't being flexible enough. When in actuality, maybe some of it was that, but a lot of it was there's some sort of operational and structural challenge and just kind of concern at somewhere along the line that was actually the problem. And so fixing that, having those clear communications, having the projects and objectives be clear, having the resources that you needed to do the role, or not having constantly shifting moments, there's room for flexibility and adaptability. And also then there's room to understand where in the process that's happening. And so those moments, I think looking back, I would have loved to have been able to advocate more clearly for what I needed, have everyone have an understanding of what that looked like, also have an understanding of their strengths and challenges. And so who I am as a professional, as an organization, you are saying we want the whole you, and we're going to support you, and also then benefit from you as well. It's like a both and. And so that's when I'm thinking about in that way. At every organization I've been at, I also had to do some sort of training on being trans, on like being queer, do training on what they them pronouns are, what it means to kind of carve out this space for myself. And so not having to do that would have been great. Having others do that would have been really lovely. Having the resources and also to say, if you want to come out here, it's okay. And so I ended up always just leaving a job and then, starting the new role with, kind of showing up as fully as who I am with the new role. But there was maybe only one time where I was able to make a shift at the organization itself. And so having those resources, support, the proactive, the reactive. I've had blatantly transphobic bosses before who were really aggressive, and I ended up leaving organizations because of them. And so it kind of runs the spectrum. But I think it does deeply impact just how you're able to show up. And what I would love to move toward is a world where you can just show up and do the work, show up and just do the job that I'm paid to do, and not necessarily have this kind of running hum of everything else that's going on.
Please share with us what systemic barriers do non-binary and trans individuals often encounter in workplaces, and also, neurodivergent. And if you have any recommendations for how organizations can begin to really address those internally and to think about it from a structural perspective of fostering a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, it's wild thinking about it from the trans perspective that how I would have answered this question a year ago is so different now in the US with the barrage of anti-trans legislation that's been happening. And so when we're thinking about it structurally and systemically, if you're in a state where you can get the healthcare that you need, if you can't get hormones or surgery or just to go to a doctor when you're sick because you don't know if that doctor is going to treat you properly, from the systemic level, then you can't show up to work because you don't have what you need to live. And so it's just wild thinking about from that level. So depending on state by state, if folks don't have the healthcare that they need, if they don't feel safe in their communities, if they're concerned that their kids are going to be taken away from them, I think that all we can't section up. We're not isolated in our workplaces, that who we are outside affects who we are inside, and the challenges that we are facing outside also affect that. Something like a gender marker on an ID or a name change on an ID You need all those to apply for a job and then also get paid. That you need to submit all of that right for your W-9 and your taxes. And so if before somebody hires me or while I have to now have a conversation about my identity, and I don't know how you're going to respond to me. I don't know if I don't know where somebody where your biases lie or any of that. Now I'm in this very strange situation where I'm vulnerable in a way that I shouldn't have to be when I'm just trying to submit this very legal this legal paperwork. And so I think structurally and systemically, that's one aspect of it. And then I'm thinking about some of the policy things that we mentioned. I think it's really important just to be explicit about it. Often, when we're thinking about trans folks, we're thinking about gender. And so often companies have a really good understanding of what it means when we're talking about gender equity, and they specifically mean women. But we often have the structures. We're thinking about pay gaps. We're thinking about promotions. We're thinking about like how we're viewing this from that systemic level. And when we're talking about trans folks, we're also talking about gender. And so I think if companies can understand that, I think it's also a very good lens to start to understand some of the challenges that exist.
So our last question together is around, ultimately, I think you and I's, some of our shared intent and goals is creating those inclusive workspaces, that we actually dream of and try to imagine and innovate with others. So perhaps being the only trans person in a workplace can be exhausting if that is the experience of someone, even if they maybe are not alone. I think still being isolated. So there's often in those kind of identity situations, a constant need for self-advocacy and education, which you have already talked about in this conversation of having to show up and do for others. So I'm wondering if you could share, thinking from that perspective, what strategies an organization or organizational leadership can think about to adopt and alleviate this burden, being proactive and creating more inclusive and supportive atmospheres, or actually like procedures and processes for non-binary and trans employees.
Yeah, I think often organizations come at it from like a deficit perspective, and they see this as like an additional burden that they have to do rather than seeing it as integral to the functioning of workplaces. And so I think if there can be that vision of this is just with good business, if we care about our organizations are made up of our people, that's like not my idea. That's just like generally like I've seen it elsewhere, right? So if we care about our people and we invest in our people, then we're going to have a good business, because then folks can be collaborative and they can be innovative and they can be productive, right? And we're thinking about organizations. And so I think being able to have that vision of saying, focusing on inclusion is actually just part of what's going to make work rather than it being this separate thing. And also, I think our workplaces are a microcosm of the worlds that we live in. And so I think that there's a really unique opportunity within our workplaces to create communities that we want to live in, that we want to build, that we want to see. And so having that positive vision rather than being afraid. I think a lot of organizations are afraid of doing the wrong thing, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of whatever it is, lawsuits or whatever, which obviously is like a very legitimate concern. But I think that's very limiting. And then I think it's coming from a place of scarcity. And so what I would really love to see is understanding the possibility of inclusive workplaces and operating from that place. And what does it mean? If this is actually something that we're investing in our people, and that means we're investing in our business because we have this vision of our business growing, whatever it is, this is like a vehicle for that, not a hindrance to it. And I think that shift might be powerful in some of the things that we're talking about.